that combined with President Trump's willingness, frankly, to lie about me. He didn't just say, hey, I like this other fellow better than Bob Good, but he said, Bob Good's been fighting me all these years, which had zero substance to it. It's full of ambitious, selfish, self-serving, prideful people who are not there for their constituents, or not there to serve. D.C., no regrets whatsoever. It was the greatest privilege of my professional life, the greatest honor of my professional life. I think the Lord wired me for battle, wired me for the strength and the determination that it takes. If Democrats hadn't been able to vote in our open primary system, we would have won. But the Democrats are willing to lose elections to enact their agenda. Republicans are afraid to enact their agenda for fear of losing elections. And we must say, never again will we let the government do to us what they did to us just a couple of years ago. What you have is fake, phony Republicans, Stephanie Reed and Chris Feraldi, who are threatened and exposed by real Republicans.
Is there anything you do differently?
Hopefully win.
Welcome back to another edition of No Holds Barred. My guest today, former U.S. Congressman Bob Good.
Hey, Rich, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Great to talk with you. I'm excited to visit with you. I have a ton of different questions. Just kind of looking to learn more about your story, your journey, how you got to be a U.S. Congressman. But I'm going to dive right in right off the bat. What did you do to piss off Donald Trump?
Oh, that is a great question right off the bat.
And I ask in all seriousness because I'm not a huge politics guy.
Yeah.
And as conservative as you are and everything with your record and him coming out and endorsing your opponent, that was my biggest question is what happened?
Well, I think I'll call it a quality, that maybe that's not the right word, but a quality or a characteristic of President Trump's personality is he demands total allegiance, total loyalty, and you can see that during the first 6 months of his new administration, the way he turns on anyone who doesn't agree with him or submit to his views on things, whether it's going after Thomas Massey from Kentucky or Rand Paul from Kentucky, coincidentally, two guys from the same state, or those who bring up the Epstein files after he's declared, oh, this is nothing to see here, everybody forget about it, everybody move on, we're doing so many other great things. But when President Trump first ran as candidate Trump in 2016, I had supported Ted Cruz initially, just because I knew Ted Cruz and had followed him. I knew he was a strong conservative, and he was kind of the number. Ultimately, it came down to those two for the nomination. But Trump, I knew, had supported Obama and had been a Democrat and had been pro-choice on an issue that was important to me, and I just didn't have a lot of confidence in him based on his background. But when he became the nominee in 2016, I endorsed him, supported him, posted on social media, encouraging some of my conservative friends who had their doubts about supporting him even as the nominee. I said, this is the easiest decision ever, Trump versus Hillary Clinton for me. I'm going to support President Trump, or then candidate Trump, enthusiastically and hope and pray for the best. And he exceeded my expectations. I thought he was an excellent president. Certainly compared to the others who, Ronald Reagan would be the only one that would be in the realm of him during my lifetime. And then in 2020, though, as I was assessing the race, and in the spring of 19, I should say, spring of 2020, of course, I endorsed him again for re-election, enthusiastically supported him when I was running again in 2020, hoping for the opportunity to serve with him during my time in Congress, not expecting Biden to win. But in 24, I should say, when Trump was running again for a third time, a year before in 19, he and DeSantis were essentially tied in the polls. And I endorsed DeSantis in May of 23 for three reasons. One, I think Florida has been the model for the country. Florida is the free state. The issues that DeSantis has taken on, if DeSantis won the first time he ran for governor in 2018 by half a point. And Florida was considered a purple state. Remember the hanging chads of 2000 during the Gore-Bush days. And a lot of people forget that Florida was a purple state long before Virginia was a purple state. And DeSantis won after 4 years of the boldest, most principled, most courageous leadership in the country, He won 4 years later by 20 points in 22. And Florida is no longer considered a purple state. Florida has more Republicans registered than they've never had that in the history of the state before until like they do now because of his courageous, bold, principled leadership. So number one, I thought Florida was the example of the country. Number two, they were tied essentially in the polls in 2019. But the polls indicated that if President Trump was convicted of what I would consider and do consider to be weaponized abuse of power by the Biden DOJ and some of their associates in New York or in Atlanta. But the polls showed if Trump was convicted by one of these crooked courts, as I would describe them, then he couldn't win a general. And so I was concerned about President Trump in the general election. And then finally, I can do math, 8 years I thought were better than 4 years. President Trump will be more limited in the second half of his term because he can't run again than someone who could run again like DeSantis could have if he won. So because I endorsed DeSantis, and I was clear when I did, I said, I'm for Governor DeSantis. I'm not against former President Trump. If former President Trump is the nominee, I will enthusiastically support him again as I did in 16 and 20. But he didn't take kindly to that. There was only 5 of us in the House who endorsed DeSantis, and I was among those 5. So President Trump apparently didn't like that.
Did they all face the same wrath of Trump? Because I knew that you endorsed DeSantis, but I'm sitting there going, there's got to be more, because at one point, what was Trump calling him? DeSanctimonious, but then all of a sudden they're tight, and it seems like he does bring people back into the fold, but maybe only if you bend the knee. Is that kind of the way it goes?
Well, and once it became clear, so I just endorsed DeSantis in May of 23. Towards the end of 23, it was becoming clear Trump was going to win. And I don't think most people could have predicted that with the what I consider abuse of power and the lawfare against him and the trumped-up bogus charges that he was facing, that it emboldened his supporters. It helped him in the polls. It became clear nobody was going to beat him in the primaries. And I had some folks begin to say to me, why don't you just switch your endorsement? I said, well, I'm not going to do that for political reasons, out of principle. If and when it becomes clear Trump's going to be the nominee, I'm going to enthusiastically support him. So I did that in January of 24. And interestingly, to your point, of course, there's a few others who endorsed DeSantis as well. Trump surrounded himself with people like Vivek Ramaswamy and Doug Burgum, who's the Secretary of Energy or Agriculture, Interior, I guess it is, who ran against him, literally ran against him, and he reconciled with them. What was unique, I think, about me was I had also been in the battles with the speaker, and I had Kevin McCarthy willing to spend $10 million through his sources to fund my opponent. That combined with President Trump's willingness, frankly, to lie about me. He didn't just say, hey, I like this other fellow better than Bob Good, but he said, Bob Good's been fighting me all these years, which had zero substance to it. Number one, I had supported him in 16 and 20, and I was supporting him again in 24. Number two, President Trump and I didn't get to serve together. I was fighting Joe Biden for my 4 years in Congress, had been hoping I would be helping President Trump with his second-term agenda, but I never opposed President Trump on anything from a policy standpoint during his 4 years, or during my 4 years, I didn't overlap with his. And so he ran ads lying about me, smearing me, saying I was bad for Virginia. I'd been bad for 4 years. I'd been fighting him, and I would continue to fight him, that sort of thing. And, out of 63,000 votes, I lost by 366 votes, less than a percent. It was a battle, and I lost in part because Virginia allows open primaries, and thousands of Democrats, including hundreds here in Virginia, or Lynchburg rather, voted in the Republican primary. Were pretty confident for my opponent.
You mentioned McCarthy, and I've got a specific story about that I'll share. But let's save that for a little bit later, because I'd love to kind of start back at the beginning. I understand, you were born and kind of partially raised in New Jersey and moved to Virginia and worked at Liberty for a number of years, worked in the private sector for a number of years, and then wound up seeking public office, starting out in Campbell County. Tell us how it all started, Bob.
Well, I'm different than most politicians, and I think you could probably start there. Right, wrong, or indifferent, agree or disagree, courageous or foolish, depending on who you're talking to. But I did not seek politics. I did not seek out politics. One of the many things that's wrong with Richmond and Washington and is it's full of ambitious, selfish, self-serving, prideful people who are not there for their constituents, are not there to serve. And that's a pretty sad commentary. We ought to hold those in public service in the highest regard, the highest respect, consider those that Richmond and Washington would be places of integrity and great admiration. Not many people would say that, and that's pretty sad. But it's full of people who've been seeking and striving and fighting and clawing and trying to, overcome others to get what they want, to obtain and to hang on to power. When I was 50 years old, and working at Liberty University in what I would consider my dream job, I was a senior associate AD for development and overseeing the fundraising organization for my alma mater, where my wife and I had met as students, where all of our kids went to school. We love Liberty University. And I never, in the 15 years I was there, considered going to another school. I didn't want to raise money just for any university. I wanted to do it for Liberty because I believe in what it stands for. And when I was 50 years old in 2015, I had some friends and neighbors and conservative political folks ask me to run for supervisor in Campbell County. And there was an open seat. There was a chance to flip that county board to a conservative Republican board, kind of like what happened in Lynchburg recently. And I resisted. I couldn't imagine adding it to my job. Fundraising for college athletics is kind of a 24/7 job. And I said, well, I'll pray about it, but in the meantime, I'll try to find somebody else to do it. And my wife and I prayed about it, and we just couldn't find anyone else to do it. So finally, we agreed to do it, to serve one term. And in 2019, I decided not to run again, which is unusual in politics. But I just decided to, I just didn't have a peace or desire about serving a second term. Thought I was done with politics, and I didn't make some grand announcement that I'll never run for anything again, but I had no intention to run again. And then it was about 6 months later that our new incumbent Republican Congress member, a fellow named Denver Riggleman out of Nelson County, was really offending the conservative base through a lot of his votes and his positions and things. And I had some of them, those same folks come to me and say, hey, is there any chance you consider running for Congress? We can't get a conservative delegate or state senator to run, and we need somebody. We're looking for a conservative supervisor. And once again, I agreed to pray about it and think about it. And a lot of folks may not remember, but my ultimate boss, Jerry Falwell Jr., had endorsed Denver Riggleman already. And so that was really a risky thing for me to do as an employee at Liberty University when my ultimate boss, the boss of my boss, was out publicly for my what would be opponent. But I just had a peace about doing it and felt like it was the right thing to do. Ended up quitting my job and going for about a year without income. And ultimately, we defeated him in the nomination process and won a very expensive race in the general, where the other side spent about $11 million for the Cameron Webb out of Charlottesville, who was a Democrat nominee. But ultimately, we prevailed.
You mentioned, and I appreciate the story. You mentioned Jerry Falwell. You mentioned your love of Liberty University. Talked about your conservative, and we'll talk more about your conservative values, being the chairman of the Freedom Caucus, which is one of the most conservative, if not the most conservative.
The most, for sure.
So you've got all that there, and, and kind of circling back to Liberty, Jerry Falwell, the scandals, all the different things coming out. How did that all sit with you?
Well, I love Liberty, as I said. I moved to Lynchburg, as you mentioned. My family's from North Jersey, and my family moved to Lynchburg in 1974, so 51 years ago. I was 9 years old at that time, and grew up around the ministry, grew up around Thomas Road Baptist and what was then Lynchburg Baptist and Liberty Baptist College and then Liberty University. Met my wife there. She's from Roanoke. Wrestled there. I got 2 degrees from there. And
same weight class as Jeff Helgeson, or no?
We were in the same weight class some of that time. So Jeff and I have known each other for 40 years,
right.
Literally 40 years, and we were teammates and roommates and competitors some of that time. We actually did wrestle against one another as well.
Who got the best of it?
It was pretty even. Jeff was a very talented wrestler and a great student of the sport. But he became a great friend, and we've been friends ever since. But love Liberty, love what it stands for, and I'm so thankful that there's thousands of people there who are there for what is the ultimate mission of the school, to train champions for Christ. Liberty's mission is to prepare young people, educated adults, to impact the world for Christ in whatever their field of study is. In my case, it was business finance. I got an MBA as well as an undergraduate degree in finance. And, I think Liberty's has great leadership under President Don DeCostin and Chancellor Jonathan Falwell, and I think Liberty's best days are ahead.
Now, that all being said, though, and you talked about training champions for Christ, Liberty's mission, but what the scrutiny that school was put through, towards the end of Jerry Falwell's Jr.'s run there. And again, whether that's all accurate or not, I know he disputes it. I know there were lawsuits, and I don't want to get into that. But I'm just saying the public perception of a school that holds itself to a higher standard kind of being dragged through the mud had to be difficult.
It was difficult to see that happen. But Liberty is and was bigger than any one individual, even the person who held that position of power for 13 years. I am just thankful that dark cloud has been lifted, and that Liberty didn't just survive but thrive through that process, I think because of the work and prayers of so many, not only the folks working on campus, not only the wonderful students that are there, but the supporters and alumni that stood behind the school. And I'm thankful that the Lord spared Liberty from the full consequence they could have suffered from having a person at the helm who was revealed to have, let's just say, a lot of issues.
Was it maybe a blessing in disguise that you didn't have to try to fundraise during that time?
Well,
I would imagine that would have been a little more difficult.
Unfortunately, I went from fundraising for Liberty Athletics to fundraising for politics, and so I'll take Liberty Athletics any day.
Bob Good joining us here on No Holds Barred. So you make the decision to run against Denver Riggleman, with your boss supporting him.
Mm-hmm.
You wind up winning. But before we even get to that, you talked about your conservative values and the fact that folks wanted you to run because they didn't feel like he was conservative enough and representing enough. There's more to being picked, chosen, whatever word you want to use, to run for Congress than just your beliefs and values, right? I mean,
that's true.
What other qualities of yours do you feel, or were you maybe told, brought people to choose you?
Well, again, while I didn't specifically seek out getting into politics, and I'll kind of accelerate to the end here for just a moment to make the point, since I lost my primary in June of a year ago, so now 14 months ago or so, as you might imagine, I have a lot of people encourage and push me to run for something in these 25 races right now, to run for something else in 26. And one of the reasons why you haven't heard me announce or declare that I'm running for this or that, most politicians, they lose a primary in June of 24. By July of 24, they've declared for something else. They're running for the next race. They are perpetual candidates in search of a race. I am not wired that way. I did what I did in Campbell County, what I did in D.C., because I felt like the Lord was leading me to do that. I feel like he prepared me for it. I think that the business experience I got during my 17 years at Citigroup, the 15 years I had in working with people and businesses and fundraising and college athletics helped prepare me for what's required, unfortunately, to seek public office today. And I think that by the Lord's grace, D.C. didn't change me. I went there and did what I said I was going to do. I stood for the things I said I would stand for. I fought for the things I said I would fight for. I left with no regrets in terms of votes that I took or stances that I took or the things that I did or said during my time in D.C. No regrets whatsoever. It was the greatest privilege of my professional life, the greatest honor of my professional life. And I think courage is in short supply in politics. Almost everyone there, and you're seeing this play out in the Republican Party today, and almost everyone in politics, self-preservation, self-ambition trumps everything else. And everything else is subordinated or surrender to that. And folks can disagree or not like what I did or said or what have you, but they can't say that I put what was best for Bob first. You don't take on the speaker, the presumptive speaker in January of 23, or the current speaker, as he became in October of 23, or endorse someone other than the former president if you're doing what you think's best for you. I was doing those things because I believe they were right, and it's what I had a piece about doing. I ran in 2020. I said I'm a biblical and a constitutional conservative. A lot of media didn't like that. Certainly my detractors didn't like that. But I said I'm a biblical conservative in the sense that where does my worldview, my values, my principles, what I believe is right and wrong, where does that come from? As a born-again Christian, I'm a biblical conservative. Secondly, I'm a constitutional conservative because I believe in the principles of the Constitution, that we ought to be following the Constitution, in which the Constitution limits the role of the government. The Constitution is designed to protect the people from the government. And even in Washington, D.C., they almost look at you with three heads, as you got three heads, or like you're crazy when you talk about this is not constitutional. This is not an appropriate role of the federal government. This is not the powers that are given the federal government in the Constitution.
Once again, Bob Good joining me here on No Holds Barred. Let's you kind of went to, and I was going to kind of migrate towards this, in kind of a normal, I'm forgetting the word that I'm looking for, but, get toward the end, what your plans are, but you kind of brought it up. You said you haven't declared to run for office. What is next for you?
Well, it'd be great if you would tell me, because I'd like some. My wife and I have been praying about that since June of last year. We were obviously disappointed to lose our primary, and while I don't miss Washington, I know Washington needs more people, desperately needs more people who are there for the right reasons and doing the right things, telling the truth, and there's just not much of that there. So I know there's more people needed in Washington who are like that, and there's not very many. But right now I'm busy doing my own podcast, the Good for America podcast. Mm-hmm. Thanks for letting me mention that on your podcast.
Absolutely.
But encourage folks to check out our podcast, Good for America, any place that they find a podcast, whether it's Spotify or Apple or YouTube or what have you. But busy also doing some political and business consulting. I'm doing some things with Liberty School of Business from an academic standpoint this fall, and doing some speaking engagements and helping some entities with some fundraising and some other media type stuff. And I'm actually very busy, as my wife and I are praying about, from more of a long-term standpoint, the next 5 or 10 years, so to speak, what would the Lord have us do? And we don't have clarity on that yet. I've not made a decision whether or whether not to run again for anything. I think that decision probably does need to be made in the next few months if you were talking about 26. And a lot of folks are encouraging me to run for 26, but that's, I'm not called to do what they want me to do. I'm called to do what I believe the Lord would have me do. And so we're praying about that, and we've made no decisions one way or another on that.
Did you enjoy it, being in Congress?
A lot of it I did. If you try to do it right, which that's a short list too, and I know it sounds very negative when you talk about who's in Washington. But if you try to do it right, it's a very difficult, very demanding, very challenging job. For me, I was up at 4 a.m, have my Bible study prayer time, get down into the gym by 5 a.m., get back in my office. I slept in my office, by the way. I had a Murphy bed attached to the wall. I'm back in my office around 6:30 or so. My staff starts showing up between 8 and 9. You're working until 10 or 11 that night, crashing in the office again. You're up in D.C. 2 or 3 weeks a month. You're back in your district 1 or 2 weeks a month. During the time you're back in your district, in my case, I'm trying to get to all 24 cities and counties that I'm not able to be at while I'm in D.C. If you take it seriously and you work really hard at it, it's a very difficult, demanding job. Yet it's a great honor. It's a great privilege. I think the Lord wired me for battle, wired me for the strength and the determination that it takes. Again, I remember after I won in 2020, my mom, who was obviously a big supporter, heavily involved in the campaign, kind of coming to me crying, saying, I don't want Washington to change you. And I'm thankful that I don't believe that it did change me. I think I helped do some things that changed the Republican House, not ultimately the way that I wanted to after 4 years, but I think we made a difference in a number of ways, my colleagues in the Freedom Caucus and I. And we changed the narrative, we changed the debate, and there's some things that are different as a result of our time there during my 4 years. So it's not an easy life. It's a very difficult, demanding life if you try to do it right. I suppose if you're in a safe district and you don't care, you can coast a little bit. But we were in a competitive district, and I cared very much about doing it the right way.
Was there an aha moment for you Because again, you didn't grow up in politics or really around politics other than the Campbell County Board of Supervisors. You didn't really have a ton, and I would guess that's a far cry from Congress. You get elected, you're a U.S. congressman. Was there an aha moment where you're sitting there going, wow, this really happened? And what was it like? What triggered it, if there was one?
I don't know that there was a moment. When we first decided to run in September of 19 for the 2020 race. I always believed we would win. I'm a bit of an optimist, but I always believed that we would win. It was going to be a convention. I didn't believe that Denver Riggleman could motivate people to come out and turn out for him in a convention. I believed that we could. We won a really tough battle there. And a lot of people thought we were going to lose to Cameron Webb in the general. I didn't realize till after it was over that was the prevailing wisdom in D.C. was that we weren't going to be able to win, that I was too conservative, that the party was divided, that they had their perfect candidate in him, a doctor, a lawyer out of Charlottesville, and we were outspent $11 million to about $4 million, and we won with just 52%, by the way. And I had to remind my colleagues up in D.C. for that matter a lot, that they think, oh, you're in some ruby red district, like Morgan Griffith's 9th district and Ben Klein's 6th district, both west of us here, are very safe Republican districts that you would really have to try hard to lose, and you probably couldn't. The 5th district you can lose, and we only, again, won with 52%, and I had to remind my colleagues up there that I was not in a very safe district. It was a Republican-leaning district, admittedly, but that we had won in a close race, and the second time I ran, we won with 57% after being what, by any objective standard of measurement by the scorecards in the ratings groups that assess elected officials, I was the most conservative member of Congress, which was reflecting the fact that I was elected as chairman of the most conservative caucus, the House Freedom Caucus, the most conservative and most influential caucus in the Republican conference, which was a great privilege as well. But I don't know that there was some aha moment, to your point. I always thought we would win. I thought I would win my primary, even with the odds stacked against us with McCarthy's money and Trump's endorsement. And we came within a whisker. If Democrats hadn't been able to vote in our open primary system, we would have won. But the Lord's in control. Don't know why he allowed that to happen, but my wife and I are trusting him for what's next.
You talked about, well, first, tell us a little bit more about the Freedom Caucus. How that evolved, why it was important to you to be a part of it, wound up becoming the chairman. I'm throwing a lot of questions in this one question, but, the whip, we hear a lot about the whip and how you have to get people into, get them in line, right? How do you do that? Start there.
Well, I'll give you a little commentary on the difference between the parties, by the way.
Okay.
The Democrat Party, which has been taken over by the radical left. The Democrat Party has the radical left wing and the extreme radical left wing, and that's all that's there. There aren't any moderates left in the Democrat Party. And Abigail Spanberger, for example, who wants to be our governor, has during her time in Congress, voted about 99% of the time with AOC and Nancy Pelosi. There's not a daylight's worth of difference. Virginians may fall prey to believing the moderate narrative about her because she talks like a centrist and a moderate. Doesn't matter what she says. She was all in on the harmful Biden policies, and she's a radical leftist based on her voting record. The Republican Party is split between moderates and conservatives. And the Democrat Party is willing to lose elections to advance their radical agenda. Think about when they had full control under Ralph Northam. The first 2 years of administration, they went radically hard left, and they lost the General Assembly as a result of that. Biden's first term, they went radically, only term thankfully, but Biden's first 2 years when they had full control of government, the Democrats went radically hard left, and they lost the House because of that. But the Democrats are willing to lose elections to enact their agenda. Republicans are afraid to enact their agenda for fear of losing elections. Instead of the 26 midterms motivating Republicans to go big, to be bold, to be courageous, to fight for the things they say they'll fight for, they're careful and they're timid and they're tepid and they're vanilla and they're benign because, well, what if we lose in 26? Right. Why don't you do something then, and then maybe you won't lose because you did what you said you would do. And then secondly, utilize the opportunity that you have, which you promised to do if you got full control of government. So it's Republicans that are the problem. And I get a lot of criticism from Republicans. I'm not very popular in the Republican Party because I call it like I see it. It's Republicans who let us down. The Republicans are going to have to run next year in the midterms on $40 trillion in debt on their watch. We're spending more than we were a year ago. They didn't use the big bill to cut spending. And they're not codifying into law the policies as a Congress that Trump is implementing. So the Republican Party is the problem because they're driving the bus off the same cliff at 95 miles an hour while the Dems are trying to drive it off at 100 miles an hour. And it's not enough just to not be as bad as Democrats. That said, 10 years ago in 2015, the Freedom Caucus was started to be the conservative conscience of the Republican Party, to try to hold the party to what we say we stand for, to say what we say we'll fight for, to what we campaign on, to actually do those things. And then secondly, to be willing, when necessary, to even challenge our own party and our own leadership when necessary. The first chairman was Jim Jordan. The second chairman was Mark Meadows from North Carolina, who became Trump's chief of staff. Then he was followed by Andy Biggs from Arizona, Scott Perry from Pennsylvania, and then I was elected chairman. And in D.C., in the Republican side anyway, chairman of committees like the Armed Services Committee or the Energy and Commerce Committee or the Education Committee or the Financial Services Committee, the committees, the party assigns those. It's not on a merit-based system. It's not based on your experience or your qualifications or your skills or your competence. The party picks you. The chairman of the House Freedom Caucus is voted on by the members of the Freedom Caucus. So I took that as a great honor that, having only been there at that time 3 years, that I was voted among my peers in the Freedom Caucus to lead that. And it was a great honor to do so. And the Freedom Caucus is the only hope in the Republican conference.
You talked before about the radical left, right? Is there an equivalent? Would the Freedom Caucus be the equivalent on the Republican side of, and I'm sure you probably don't love the term radical right? No one likes the term radical, but, I mean, fighting against, I guess so many people right now think that, you've got the radical left and then you've got the right, and where we really belong is somewhere in the middle. Your thoughts on that?
Well, this won't surprise you probably, but in my view, if you're a moderate, if you're a centrist, if you're a swing voter independent, then what do you stand for? What do you believe in? So if, let's say we're traveling together, and perhaps this is not a great analogy, but you think we need to go west, and I think we need to go east to get where we need to go, or where we say we want to go, one of us is wrong. So I guess the compromise would be to stand there in the middle and not go anywhere. And I guess we'll both be wrong. Neither one of us got to where we're trying to go. And the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, at least in principle, the Republican Party, have very different visions for the country. I'll just use one big issue, for example. Immigration, which is really not the right word to use, because immigration, by definition, is a lawful, legal process. I hate it when people will say, illegal immigrants or call them migrants. Okay, it was a great privilege as a member of Congress to be at naturalization processes, ceremonies where people who applied for citizenship, earned their citizenship, demonstrated they could contribute and make us better. They wouldn't be a drag in terms of on our social services. They could contribute. They learned our language. They passed the citizenship test. They pledged their allegiance to our country. They renounced their allegiance to the country where they came from. They were so thankful to be Americans, to help us become a better country, and they were patriotic. It was a wonderful privilege to be part of that. That's legal immigration. Our nation was built on that, as you know. Illegal invasion is what the Democrats support. And during Joe Biden's 4 years, Abigail Spanberger, Mark Warner, Tim Kaine, like to talk like moderates, all in on this, by the way. They opened the floodgates to 15 to 20 million illegals to come in. The Democrats believe that the 7 billion people around the world who don't live in the United States have the right to come here, have the right to be here legally or illegally, and there's no limit. They will never, and that's a fundamental disagreement where the Republicans believe we should get to decide who gets to be in our country under what conditions. So very different views. And
what about within the Republican Party, though,
yes.
right? I mean, you're on the far right. Freedom Caucus, you already talked about it being the most conservative branch or part of the Republican Party. But, in what you said makes total sense about the left and the right, the far left and the far right coming together. It's never going to happen. But for the good of the Republican Party, the ability to compromise within the party to make sure that you get where you need to go.
Well, one of the things I talk about often is, why do Republicans want to win elections? Why do Republicans want to have power? What is the purpose of the Republican Party? Is it just to be in power? Is it just to win elections? Is it just to not be the Democrats? Is it just to have control? Or what do we stand for? What are we trying to accomplish? Is anything non-negotiable? Is anything sacred? Is anything worth fighting for? Many Republicans, if they were honest, would say no to those questions. We just want to have the majority. We want to be in power. And if that means we got to grow government and increase spending too, if that means that, we give amnesty to tens of millions of illegals who are here, if that means instead of using any surplus to pay down the federal debt, we're going to send it out in rebate checks, if that means we don't want to force people or require people to work in order to get federal subsistence for able-bodied working age Americans, if that means we're going to have climate subsidies and green energy subsidies and things like that, and mandates and all the rest, if that, as long as we can stay in power, it's okay. I don't hold to that. And when you say,
are there a lot of Republicans who feel that way, though?
Their actions indicate they feel that way. Republicans had full control of government. Through this reconciliation bill, could have done whatever they wanted to do. And they just passed a bill that will increase the debt over 10 years by $6 trillion on top of the $25 trillion that it's going to increase if they did nothing.
Yeah, I know.
With full control of government.
You're not a fan of the big,
but when you say
bill.
Radical right, so I think you have to answer that question, take it to an issue. Let's get specific and you say, okay, mainstream or centrist or moderate Republicans or swing voters or independents, they're at this position, but you're radical right because your position is this. And I'm happy to have that conversation about that position on whatever position it might be. Generally, what a conservative like myself believes is that we ought to hold to what the Constitution says, where the power is supposed to be, number one, be in the hands of the people, number two, at the local level. The Ninth Amendment that says that every right that is not prohibited to us in the Constitution is retained by us. That's that the government's not allowed to trample on your rights unless the Constitution gives them the right to do so.
So if it's not in there, you have the right to do it.
That's right. And that the 10th Amendment says that everything that is not specifically given to the federal government in the Constitution is left to the states and the people. And the Constitution was very specific in the powers it gave Washington because it knew that Washington could become this tyrannical, oppressive, overbearing system, if you will, that would trample on the rights of the citizens. And we have very little ability as individuals to change Washington. We have more ability to change Campbell County or Lynchburg City as a citizen than we do Washington. A little more ability to change Richmond. We see our delegates and our state senators, a little more our governor more than our president. But Virginia ought to be able to operate independently of the federal government except as the Constitution limits or empowers the federal government. And then Campbell County and Lynchburg, Virginia, and Bedford County and so forth ought to be able to exercise our freedoms unless we're breaking state law. And that's not how it is. The federal government's controlling most of our lives.
So based on what you've said so far, if you decide to run again, if you win again, if you're elected again, compromise isn't really in your vocabulary.
Well, certainly sometimes that's the nature of politics in a sense, that you're trying to say, okay, what is the best I ultimately can do that I'm going to decide is a win? I'm going to take the win. I'll give you an example on the abortion issue, for example. Okay, I'm 100% pro-life. Mm-hmm. I don't believe there's any circumstances under which killing the child is justified or makes the situation better. We can expand on that if you wanted to. But would I vote for a bill that limited abortions that wasn't quite to the degree that I thought they should be limited? Of course. If I think every child matters, if every innocent, precious life in the womb is worth protecting, then I'm going to vote for a 20-week or a 15-week or a 12-week or a 6-week. Of course.
Okay.
or a very benign kind of a born alive bill, or a
Health of the mother.
and would I vote for a bill that had some exceptions in it that I didn't necessarily agree with because it would save most babies in the womb? Of course I would, while I would continue to fight to protect all life. That's just an example. So sometimes you're going to vote for something because it's improving or moving in the right direction. But it seems like in Washington, on the Republican side, all the compromises demanded of the conservatives. Hey, you got to keep spending more money. You got to keep growing government. You got to be a team player. You got to be loyal to the party. And that same pressure is not applied to the moderates who want to vote like Democrats and betray the principles that Republicans ran on. No Republican runs on, I'm going to go work with the Democrats. I'm going to do what the Democrats want to do. I'm going to agree with Schumer and Pelosi, Hakeem Jeffries, and I'm going to grow government, but not as much as the Democrats. I'm going to increase spending, but not as much as the Democrats. They don't run on that, but many of them vote that way when they get there.
Which Democrat whose name we know and whose personality we think we know isn't nearly as bad of a person as we think they are on TV?
Well, again, I think the Democrat Party as a whole, the elected officials, have become radical extreme leftists, and their policies are contrary to the founders, the Constitution, the principles upon which we were established as a nation, and are certainly not America first. But there are some individuals who I enjoyed their company, and I liked them as individuals. And you said, hey, names that we'll know. Most people don't know most members of Congress. But Bobby Scott from Virginia's Virginia's 3rd District, and Don Beyer from Virginia's, I believe it's the 8th District, but Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. Nice guys who I enjoyed their company. We didn't agree on hardly anything, but I enjoyed their company.
There's not a lot of that anymore.
There's not. There isn't. And frankly, I enjoyed the Virginia delegation. We would have a monthly meeting between the 2 senators and the 11 members of the House, a nice luncheon where we would just get together and hang out and talk, and it was collegial and it was friendly. Again, we didn't talk a whole lot of substantive policy because the divisions on ideology and values were very different. But I enjoyed the company of just about everybody who I served with from the Virginia delegation. And that helped when you were trying to do things where there was those rare things where there was, we're trying to get, some help for the ports or some commerce type things, or sometimes it was naming stuff, naming post offices and things like that. But I enjoyed my Virginia delegation colleagues.
Politics in general right now. And I think I told you before this interview started, I may have even said it earlier in it, but I'm not a big political guy, right? I can't get into the weeds and talk a lot of policy with you or those different things. However, it seems like since 2016, it's become almost a form of entertainment. Mm. And I'm not saying that in a good way, but I mean, just a circus.
Yeah.
Really? I mean, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton and, and then what we've seen with the Biden years locally here on city council, we've got Republicans fighting. You mentioned before your buddy Jeff Helgeson, that whole scene with, him where he probably should have been the mayor, but Feraldi goes behind his back from what you sit there and you think to yourself, it's almost must-see TV in some instances when it doesn't feel like it should be.
Well, part of that is the last word you said, TV, there. And the fact that we get to see a lot more through social media and the other communication channels and mediums that we didn't used to have, of course. But the intensity and the vitriol and the passion and the ugliness has existed from the very beginning. If you read our history of how we were founded and the fights and the battles they had, through the Revolutionary period and the founding of our country, through the Civil War period and so forth, and what FDR, for example, tried to do. He tried to pack the Supreme Court, for example. He tried to expand it the way that Biden and Democrats talked about doing when the Supreme Court went conservative. But it's really not new to have the intensity. I think what's different is that we see it in ways that we didn't used to it. Politicians and candidates and elected officials can go directly to their constituents through social media and podcasts and all these different channels that didn't exist before. But politics impacts every area of our lives. It impacts everything that we do. I think people realized that during the first 4 years, or during the 4 years of the Biden administration, during the Northam administration here in Virginia. I fear that maybe people haven't suffered enough under Democrat policies, and there's a willingness perhaps to reelect Democrats this fall, and Virginia will suffer tremendously if that happens. Even just energy. If the American people and Virginians understood who and what Democrats were on energy and climate and environment, Democrats could never win another election. And so it matters. I often say as a born-again Christian that after things of scriptural and eternal significance, of biblical significance, the most important issues after that are things of political and cultural significance, because it impacts our kids' schools, it impacts our ability to earn a living, and it impacts our ability from a health standpoint, from a freedom standpoint. Just look at what the government did to us during COVID. The government harmed the people, put businesses out of business, shut down places of worship, forced people to get a vaccine, forced people to disclose whether or not they had a vaccine, lied about the risks of the vaccine, and how many people are suffering because of they took the vaccine, where they promised, if you take the vaccine, you won't get COVID, which was not true, by the way. Right. And they made people wear masks, which was harmful to their health. They lied about that. That was a test run, many people believe, for the next crisis when it comes. And we must say, never again will we let the government do to us what they did to us just a couple of years ago. They shut down schools, and those children suffered irreparable academic harm for no reason when the kids were not at any risk from the virus, by the way.
Do you think we've learned that lesson?
I think some people learned the lesson. Again, I think, and it was largely perpetrated by the Democrats, there was a clear division on the policies that were implemented and the mandates that came down through COVID. Now, some weak Republican governors and so forth participated, no question about it. Some weak Republican politicians who were afraid of taking a risk and taking a stand. I'm proud that my team and I was on the right side of this issue from the very beginning in 20, the stances that we took. We spoke the truth, we took the risks to do that, but we were proven right ultimately, I believe. But I think people being willing to vote for Democrats shows they didn't learn the lessons of 20 and 21 and what Democrats did to us.
Bob Good joining me here on No Holds Barred. You mentioned before, good friends, known Jeff Helgeson for 40 years. Wrestled against him. You said you beat him most times, right?
I didn't say that. Jeff would correct you on that. I said it was pretty even.
You did say that.
Yeah, pretty even.
Sitting back, bird's eye view, what's your opinion of where we're at with City Council right now?
It's very simple to me. And frankly, you kind of referenced back, we talked about Campbell County. You said, it must be a great deal difference in D.C. versus Rustburg, Virginia. But really, it's not different. And it's not hard to know what's right and what's wrong. We know. It's not hard to know what integrity is and what honesty and trustworthiness and truthfulness is. It's not hard to know what's selfish and what's principled and what's pure pride and ambition. And those are the things that you battle at all levels of government. And in my view, it's very, very simple. What you have is fake, phony Republicans, Stephanie Reed and Chris Feraldi, who are threatened and exposed by real Republicans. Same problem that we have in Washington between conservatives and moderates. And in Washington, they hate the Freedom Caucus because the Freedom Caucus exposes them, the Republicans do. In Washington, they hated me there because I helped expose them. Thomas Massie and Rand Paul are exposing them. And in Lynchburg here, I believe Stephanie Reed ran as a Republican, and I don't believe she's a Republican. I don't believe that she holds Republican values at all. I believe Chris Feraldi is a moderate Republican his selfish interest trumps everything. But I won't try to crawl inside their heads as to why Feraldi, I have my feelings on it, but why he didn't want Jeff Helgeson to be mayor. But it's clear to me that he was by his actions, so desperate for Jeff Helgeson not to be mayor, and he hoped for himself to be mayor. It's publicly known. I called, and I told Brian and Mary this on WLNI, the morning show. I called all the Republicans after that election when the Republicans got control, congratulated the new winners, talked to the existing Republicans and the ones who won, and encouraged them to come together and support Jeff for mayor. Called them all, told them that. Only one of them, Chris Feraldi, recorded the call for whatever reason, which I think made him look bad. I didn't care that he recorded me because I didn't say anything I don't say publicly. And I encouraged them all to support Jeff. Stephanie was non-committal, and Chris was non-committal, and I said, well, who would you vote for if you didn't vote for Jeff? There's only 2 Republicans who've been there. Jeff's been there 20 years. Everybody else is new. And finally, Chris said, well, I'm thinking about voting for myself. And I said, Chris, your time will come. Support Jeff now. He's been there for 20 years. He's been the conservative fighter. It's his turn. And then that sets you up to potentially be mayor next time. And apparently he couldn't abide by that. And my guess is, this I don't know, but he couldn't get Stephanie to go along for him to be mayor. She would only go along if she got to be mayor and him vice mayor. And the Democrats didn't want Helgeson, so they went along with that as well. And, I mean, how ridiculous that was, that somebody who had never been in elected office, had never been on city council, was new to the city of Lynchburg for that matter, to be elected mayor immediately upon coming in to city council. That was an embarrassment and ridiculous. And she would never have won if she had campaigned and run saying that's what she was going to do. I was embarrassed that I had endorsed her. And, Chris votes for more government, more spending, resists and fights, formerly Jeff, now Kurt Deemer, Jacqueline Timmer, and Marty Mischin's efforts to shrink government, to cut spending. And there's right and wrong. There's not equivalency here. There's right and wrong. The conservative position is the right position. The less government is the right position. The less spending and the fiscal responsibility is the right position. But truthfulness and integrity and honesty and trustworthiness is right also.
Marty Mischins
Yeah.
has a lot of the beliefs, I guess, that you support. But man, always, just his background, his story. Do you wish he could just tone it down a little bit?
I'm sure that all of us, have in elected office, have folks who say, oh, you could have said or done this better, or been more tactful, or more conscientious, if you will, more sensitive. But Marty believes in less government. He believes in less spending. He believes that government exists for the people and that the people should be in charge and not the government. And he believes in holding accountable local government, city government, which hates that, by the way. Whenever he brings something forward to say, you know what, let's look at this, let's examine this, let's bring some accountability, some transparency, the Democrats and the pretend Republicans are all offended at the suggestion that the city staff should have to answer questions or be accountable or have what are you inferring? What are you suggesting? The members of the city council work for the citizens of Lynchburg. They don't work for the staff. The city manager works for the city council, who works for the people. And everything I see Marty trying to do is trying to shrink government, to cut spending, to root out waste in our government and in our spending, and he's doing it on behalf of the citizens.
Why do you think he's so polarizing, though? More so...
Well, some of it's personality and style. I've teased Marty and said, you're kind of a bull in a china shop. That's kind of, he's a big guy. He's a kind of an overbearing personality. And I don't mean that in a negative, critical way, but he is. And he's probably not the warmest, fuzziest, most sensitive, most considerate in his style, if you will. But I would be hard pressed to name or to find policies or things that he wants to do that I don't agree with. And it takes courage and it takes principle. I don't know how. I would suggest that he doesn't get a fair shake from a lot of the media, quite frankly. The media certainly leans left, leans centrist at best. They certainly don't lean conservative. And, the fact is, most of what government does really shouldn't be done, certainly at the federal level. less so at the state level, and even less so at the city level.
What do you mean by that?
Well,
What government does shouldn't be done?
and I said primarily at the federal level.
Right.
So let's take the federal level. Other than safety and security, most of what the federal government does is not an appropriate role of the federal government. Federal government shouldn't have a Department of Education. It shouldn't have an EPA. It shouldn't have a Department of Energy.
Should trickle down to the states?
Well, the
local
Constitution
level.
doesn't limit what the states can do, because if we don't like what Virginia does, we got options.
Right.
Probably not going to go north. Probably going to go south.
And that's the abortion
But
issue,
you have
right?
options.
Where that
You do
was,
have now, and I support federal restrictions on abortion because I think life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, our founding principles began with, we believe there are unalienable rights from our Creator, that among these are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Our founders believed that our rights ultimately come from God, that there were unalienable rights that were just self-evident.
Well, yeah, my point wasn't that it should be at the state level, but it is now at the state level.
Yes, what the Dobbs decision, the overturning of Roe did was turn it back to the people's representatives, the legislators, said the federal government can regulate it or limit it if they want to, pass laws to legislate on abortion. They don't have to. And the states can do it, don't have to. It turned it back over to the legislative bodies. And so what's happened is across the 50 states, some states have taken actions to restrict it, some have taken actions to expand it, if you will. But right, we do have options in terms of if we don't like what a state does, we can go to another state. Can't really do that with the federal level.
Final couple minutes, and again, appreciate your time. We talked about it before. We kind of jumped ahead. Chronological, by the way, was the word I was looking for way back when I was stumbling through it. But, thought I'd get to this to the end. You touched on it before. You're praying about it. You want to see what your path is, whether you run again or not. What do you think would be, not what you're going to do, but what do you think would be a fun or a good role for you if it were in government? Is it congressman again? Is it bigger, better? I mean, is it more local? Where do you think you'd be happiest?
Well, I don't dodge a lot of questions, but I will dodge it a little bit and just say I don't want to get into particulars on that. It might be somewhat obvious to many that I'm, praying about, considering whether or not would I run for my previous seat, would I run again in the 5th District, would I run for something else next year or in the future. And again, I never want it to be one of those perpetual politicians relentlessly in search of the next race. My opponent from the last election, that was like his 5th race in 2 years. He had won a state Senate seat in November of 23, and literally before he was sworn in, he declared, if he had any integrity, he would resign that seat that he just beat other Republicans for the nomination when he had no intention or desire of serving in that seat. How do you do that? How do you win in November and declare in November before you're sworn in January you're running for something else and then not resign from that seat, quite frankly? And that's an extreme, he and I are very different, and that's an extreme example. But I never want it to be that kind of a politician. And, it would be in my selfish political interest that as soon as I had lost the primary in June of last year, to declare right away for something else, to start running right away for this. There's no political interest or personal interest in me being unsure and not making a decision on that, because I could be fundraising and attacking my opponent. And I don't talk a lot about him, but my former opponent, I should say. So in terms of, folks can speculate on that. There's different things that folks encourage me to run for. People encourage me to run in 25 for this year, and not for AG, but for the other 2 positions, governor or lieutenant governor. And my wife and I just didn't have a peace or desire that was the right thing for us to try to do. And so we didn't make that decision.
If you did run against McGuire again for your old seat, is there anything you do differently?
Hopefully win.
In order to win.
Yeah, well, it would be a different dynamic than before. We were certainly the underdogs in 20 in the primary and in the general election. And it would be a status quo Republican versus genuine conservative, I believe. Voting for all the spending in Washington that's continued on autopilot with Republican control. Are Republican voters fine with that? They're fine with the debt continue to increase at about $2 trillion a year on Republicans' watch, just like it was on Democrats' watch. The debt is a massive existential threat that the Republicans are not dealing with.
Did you answer the question? What would you do? Is there nothing you do differently?
Well, I mean, every campaign's a little different. I guess you need to be a little more specific.
Well,
with
I mean,
your
and I was just, was there something that you noticed when you lost? And I know you talked about the Democrats being able to vote in the Republican primary, but, assuming that it would be a primary again and Democrats would be able to vote again, is there something that you would change to, or was the vote close enough that you think you could just take it?
Well, I wouldn't change who I am or what I stand for or the things that I believe in. Certainly you do everything you can to run the most effective race that you could and draw as much contrast as you can between yourself and your opponent. And then ultimately it's in the hands of the voters if you make that decision to pursue that.
Good for America, the podcast. You enjoying it?
I am. As you know, with your experience, it's a lot of work to do something like that. But we have done 15 episodes now and covering everything from what I call the big ugly bill to immigration.
Yeah, you're not a fan, huh?
I am not a fan. To the Epstein files, to,
Is that a big deal, the Epstein files?
Yes, it's a big deal.
Why?
And it's a big deal because blind justice, everyone being equal under the law, including the wealthy, the powerful, and the well-connected, is foundational to who we are as a constitutional republic.
Do you think they're covering it up? Do you think there is more than they're releasing?
I do think that there is concern, a bipartisan concern, that's existed since this first became an issue some 10 years ago or so now, 15 years ago, I guess, really, since he was convicted, I think, in 2009, the first time. And it became an issue, I think, in 2008. But so 15 years through the Obama, Trump, Biden administrations, I think there's bipartisan concern about who it implicates and who it embarrasses and who it hurts. I don't care about any of that. Irrespective of who it exposes, there was 1,000 or so underage victims. It wasn't just Epstein who abused those people. Why were people flying with him? Why were people visiting his island? Why were people associating with him? And everything should be disclosed. You can protect the victims, the innocent victims. Everybody wants to do that. And the louder people scream and squeal and say, this is nothing, just move on, forget about it, feeds into the suspicion that there's something that people don't want to come out. And, many of the people who are working in the Trump administration now were those who were saying that, hey, this needs to come out. And, we're going to do this if we get in control, get in charge. And so I support what Thomas Massie and some other Republicans are trying to do. They're frankly joining with Democrats to say this is bipartisan, this is nonpartisan, everything should be revealed and let the chips fall where they may. You
said you were going to do it, now do it.
Exactly.
Back to your podcast for just a second. Good for America. You're going to start having some guests on. You haven't done that yet. And I was saying before we even got going here today, that's the hardest thing to do. Just sit there and talk to yourself for 30 minutes at a time. Are you enjoying it?
I am. It gives me the chance to, share my views on things, my take on what's happening in our country, what's going on in Washington, what Congress is doing or should be doing. I critique the president some as well. I talk about the great things that he's doing. I talk about the things that I disagree with, where I think he's wrong. And that's what I would do if I was in D.C. now, in Congress, and that's what I would do if I were to return to Congress. But I, from the very beginning, had the intention of having some guests because we're moving into the August recess where the members of Congress are not in D.C. and their schedules are a little bit more flexible. I've reached out to some of my former colleagues and asked them about coming on to have them assess the first 6 months and what they think about what's been happening, what they think Congress ought to be doing from here.
That'll be fun. Look forward to checking those podcasts out and look forward to seeing what's next for you.
Thanks, Rich. Appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Appreciate your time.
With you. Yes, sir. Thank you.